Hey everyone, and welcome back to Todos Santos. On the last main episode, we finished the airport, and today we're going to start developing the area around it. And that's really all we have left to do for the series, is to finish up this whole section of the city. I had originally intended for this to be the finale of the series, but I ended up recording so much and going into so much detail, even compared to usual, that it's going to end up being 2 episodes. So for this episode, we're going to build a mostly low-density residential area, a large grocery store with a giant parking lot, a somewhat unusual condo district, and a mixed-use commercial and residential district over here. This space up here is for next episode. Before we get to any of that, we're going to have to connect that all up with a new avenue. I'm thinking that the history of this avenue really aligns with basically the way we built it. So we have all these weird fringes at the outskirts of the city. They butt up right against the airport, and they're just not really meant to be a cohesive area. So at some point they went and probably over a long period of time, the city decided to develop this area for whatever reason, maybe as part of the plan to redevelop the industrial area that we built on our live streams. And that's been changed into like a big commercial and residential area. So they did something similar to that here. And they took all these roads that are running at different angles and serving different purposes, and they basically widened them and connected them to make this giant, very weirdly shaped avenue. So this comes up here. It goes under the rail bridge because I didn't want to have a level crossing there for obvious reasons right next to the other intersection. And then it comes up here and terminates at the beach. And then the road here that runs perpendicular is going to run through this area that we're going to build next episode. So it takes all these highways that are running in from out of town or off the map or whatever you want to call it, and it connects them. And I think that's something you see in a lot of cities is you'll get these various highways that have existed for a long time, and they don't really have any real connections. And then eventually the city comes in and they'll say, you know, we need a new avenue to connect these 2 highways or freeways or whatever you have. Luckily for the residents that are eventually going to live over here, we're not running a freeway in between these 2 highways, just a normal avenue. And that's going to give us some opportunities for commercial developments and various other things that I think are going to be a lot of fun this episode. We're also just going to take this bus line that runs over here at the edge of the city and extend that out into these 2 new neighborhoods. A lot of these pre-existing local roads that I had laid down during one of our live streams, well, I had a specific idea for what I wanted to do here, but it's not really going to work out with what I have planned here. So I'm going to delete all of them and rebuild it. And I'm just going to do a much simpler grid system with just a few quirks here and there. I'm going to keep this weird little triangle up here because that's taken directly from San Juan, and I think it looks suitably weird, so I'm just going to keep it. The International Airport of Todos Santos takes aircraft safety as seriously as it can, so of course we have to figure out some distance near the end of the runways where we're not going to have giant skyscrapers. The airport doesn't actually have the authority to enforce this, so what we end up having is a high-rise dissuasion line. So over on the right, it's going to say you probably shouldn't build any high-rises, and over on the left, you can build whatever you want. We're going to start at the weird triangle, building whatever we want with a few skyscrapers. I'm imagining, I mean, they're not quite skyscrapers, but they're tall buildings. I'm imagining that because this is the line where maybe there's some sort of incentive to not build skyscrapers on the other side, there's a cluster of them here trying to take advantage of the nice area. I mean, there's a nice beach in the area. It's a pretty wealthy neighborhood. So people will want to have some high-rise development here. So there's this small cluster of high-rises. The rest of the neighborhood, though, is going to be pretty much a standard low-density Todos Santos neighborhood, although I am using this bigger set of houses that just have all these lovely details. And honestly, they look so nice and they're so fun to place that I wish I had just used these throughout the entire city instead of the 1x2 buildings that I've used for a lot of it to get like that Google Earth aerial view that you get. But anyway, that's something I've talked about at length before. I'm not going to go into it more now. Suffice to say, I'm just using these awesome buildings and placing a whole lot of them, doing little bits of detailing here and there just to try to make them feel a little bit more natural, fitting into the various strange shapes of the road network. And then I moved to develop this area of the beach where it goes up closer to the main avenue, and I wanted to have one last little bit of development with this apartment block. But the game thought that was a terrible idea, so I had to redo all that stuff really quickly and detail this place up a little bit. I'm thinking this was quite a recently built development, basically move-in ready, so they have slightly different back porches here. Some of them have grass, some of them have some tiles, some of them have pools, some of them don't, but they all pretty much are done in the same style. We don't have any furniture back here or anything, because trust me, there's going to be lots of that kind of detailing next episode, so we don't need to see any more of it at the moment. At least I don't. And then there's this random, maybe slightly older apartment development over here. The parking area is a little bit more worn down, and I thought it might be nice to have a little public beach access path here. But that's not quite enough public access for the beach, so we're going to make this whole stretch of beach along the avenue public access. I mean, all the beaches in Todos Santos have public access, but it's just an open area with no development or private barriers in between the road and the beach. We're going to have a little park that runs along here, which I think looks kind of nice. You can imagine maybe this avenue used to be wider and they made it smaller and added this pedestrian path along the edge that runs up to the parking lot up here. I'm just trying to blend it all together with the beach by using these theme sand decals, and I just think that looks really nice, and it gives that effect that the sand is being kicked up and blown off over onto all this infrastructure. Also going to add some of these realistic functioning beach assets, which are really nice for drawing people to this kind of area. I'm going to replace some of the built-in props with some different ones and make sure the invisible parking spaces are removed because I don't want people parking on our public beaches. That's not a very good idea, in my opinion. Well, that happened again, but at least I got a crash report this time. I was eventually able to figure out that it was, for some unknown reason, these procedural object files that were causing my game to crash. Don't ask me why. I mean, I suppose it could be a coincidence, but I deleted those, and when you relaunch the game, procedural objects recreates those files, and, you know, I played hours and hours since then without a single crash, and I had noticed that it only happened when I was converting an asset into a PO, so I think that must have been my problem. No idea what made that start to happen because I hadn't changed any settings in PO as far as I know, but I got it fixed, and maybe if you have that problem, that'll help you out, hopefully. I'll see if I can find the source where I read about that, and I'll link that in the description in case you want to see more information about that. If I can find it, and if I remember, so chances are pretty low it'll be there. Just yell at me if they aren't. So with that out of the way and no more crashes on the horizon, we just have dozens or maybe hundreds of these houses to put down. So I'm going to speed it up. Let's go. One of the biggest problems that I ran into, at least now I'm recognizing this looking back over the series, is that making a city this big, it's just kind of, it's not like impossible to arrange the houses perfectly into these kinds of blocks so that they look fairly realistic. But it's just kind of discouraging to think about doing that for thousands and thousands of these buildings over and over again. And I think because of that, I ended up being pretty lazy with a lot of the low-density neighborhoods in the city in previous builds. But for some reason, doing this build, I was having a lot of fun doing this micromanaging and making sure every house fell into place using Move It. And I think the results are just so much better that I wish I had taken the time to do this sort of build for all of the low-density neighborhoods of Todos Santos. But anyway, for this area, I ended up doing it like this, and I think the results are just really nice to look at. And they also, you don't lose that Google Earth view. It still looks pretty realistic looking down at it from above, like we'll see later on. Anyway, as for the zoning of the neighborhood, I wanted to go all residential for this area between the shoreline and the railroad tracks. Since we're more toward the fringes of the city, right next to the airport, I wanted things to be a little bit more separate and reduce some of the mixed-use stuff that we have done in other parts of the city. So we have this vast area of just purely residential stuff, and then we're going to have a dedicated commercial zone over on the other side of the railroad on this main avenue, and then, of course, the mixed-use zone right next to the airport that I talked about earlier. And even as tempting as it is to build up a commercial or hotel area along the beach frontier, trust me, there's going to be plenty of that next episode. So I really wanted to get this, that Google Earth view of looking down at this vast expanse of single-family homes. And honestly, that goes along pretty well with the history of this area that I'm totally not making up on the fly as I record this commentary. Because all of this stuff is more recent, it's going to be slightly more car-centric and not built up from these old town centers like many of the other commercial zones of the city have been. So in those sorts of zones, it's basically like you have this whole self-sufficient town here that has then been absorbed by Todos Santos as it develops outward. There's a word for that. I forget what it is, though. It's a cool word. But in this sort of development, they know in advance they have all this empty land, or maybe it used to be industrial land or something like that, and they need a whole lot of housing, so they just raise everything to the ground, put down some roads, and zone up some houses. You could imagine maybe some of these along the shoreline, there's so much value there that some of them have been turned into shops or bed and breakfasts or Airbnbs, that kind of stuff. I mean, that just seems like the sort of thing that would almost have to happen in this kind of area because there's so much value in being able to live or stay along this beautiful beach here. And speaking of that, connecting up to the public beach park that we made before, there's not quite enough space to continue the walkway and have this kind of more landscaped area, but I did want to have a direct public access to the beach running along the avenue where it's right up against the shoreline here. I did notice that most public beaches, at least that I've seen in real life and in my research, usually will have some sort of barrier along the sidewalk or walkway for most of the stretches, and then there are places intermittently where you can cross through that to get to the beach. Not sure exactly why that is, as opposed to just having the beach open all the way along the stretch of road, but anyway, that's what I did. Thought I was maybe getting a little bit repetitive with all these single-family homes, so I thought it would be kind of funny just to have this one random apartment building right across from the fence separating this area from the runway. It's not the most detailed area ever, but I think it just serves to stand out from the rest of the houses, of which we have to put down a lot more still. So let's go. across the railroad tracks from the neighborhood that we just built, we're just gonna have a little bit of commercial zone. Most of it's not really of note, just a long stretch of our usual commercial buildings, most of which has off-street parking since there's no street parking along the main avenue here. But I did want to make this mini strip mall kind of build, which I've seen a few of these looking around San Juan, so I'm just using these Red Rock Plaza buildings by King Leno, squishing them down so they're not so large, and putting down a few custom signs, making a little quick parking lot, and an access area in the back as well. And that's something that I had pretty much an identical problem with when I was talking about before with the low density houses, how it was discouraging early on to think of like making so many of these neighborhoods over and over again in detail. I had a similar problem with commercial zones, and I really would just kind of plop down buildings without paying attention to the space around them and how they're set up to have parking spaces or green spaces, fencing, that kind of stuff. I just really didn't care too much about in the vast majority, I would say, of the commercial strips in the city. And again, the series is coming to a close soon, so I want to go into a little bit more detail and just be more mindful of that kind of thing. Over on this side of the avenue, we have our typical line of houses, except like I was mentioning before, along the beach, these have been converted into businesses. And instead of tearing down the old architecture and building up new stuff, they just plop a sign on the front and run their business out of an old house. I feel like I always see like salons, law offices, and insurance agents are always in buildings like this. Anyway, I promised you a grocery store, and you're gonna get one. Taking inspiration from this unique Pueblo supermarket. I've had this area earmarked ever since we built the surrounding roads in our live streams for a build like this, and I don't think it would really be right to finish Todos Santos without having built at least one Pueblo, especially considering that we built a Pueblo warehouse back in like episode 61, but we don't have any of their stores anywhere in the city, so here we go. One thing that I feel like I tend to forget on this kind of build is providing access to the back of the building, especially when it's, a giant supermarket like this. You need to be able to have deliveries and that kind of stuff. So I'm running this 4-lane road all the way around the exterior of the store, and that's going to allow access to this little delivery area. Sometimes in this kind of store, you'll see, I don't know exactly why they do this, but there's just a very gently sloped little depression next to the loading bays. So I wanted to do that here. Probably ends up being a little bit too steep to be realistic, but I figured I'd rather have it be noticeable as part of this build rather than a realistic slope, because if it was really any less than this, it's kind of hard to even notice. Just based the way the lighting works and the shadows work and everything, it's kind of hard to notice the difference if it's not a somewhat exaggerated angle. Anyway, parked in here, we have a couple of branded Pueblo trailers, because we had these over in the Pueblo warehouse, like I mentioned before, that I made back in episode, I think, 61. And one of these is attached to a cab about to be pulled off somewhere else, or maybe it's in the process of being delivered. You might be wondering what I'm doing here, and yeah, me too. But if you remember back to the Pueblo we're taking inspiration from, well, it has this unique sign, and I figured it would just be a shame to not replicate that. Then to replicate this portion of the sign, I'm going to use this Cuban supermarket asset. I'm going to cover up this portion of it and change it to a 24/7 supermarket, which I have to say I'm quite proud of that little change there, allowing me to use that asset in this situation. Just need a few more details around the front, some planters, trash cans, carts, etc. Next up, we have this cluster of condos near the SJU airport. We're going to start by taking inspiration from this group of high-rises, which I believe are collectively called Laguna Gardens, and I'm going to build something approximately in the same arrangement. I didn't really have quite the right buildings, so I'm taking these Cuban ones and using PO to stretch them out until they're just about the right shape. I don't want to stretch them too far because then they start to lose their proportions and they just look weird, but I just pull them out as much as I can and then put them in some sort of reasonable arrangement and give each of them a giant parking lot, connect all those up with some smaller parking lots. Of course, because these are POs, they don't function anymore, so I'm going to clip a few high-density residential blocks into these so we can get some people living here. And it's a little strange. I've been adding quite a few high-rise apartment blocks like this over this course of this episode and the next one as well, and I just can't seem to get the population over about 335,000. I mean, you'll see it's been floating around 330,000 for quite a while, but I can't seem to push past that for some reason. But, I mean, all things considered, that's a pretty good population. I think my original goal was 300,000, I think. Or maybe it was 200,000. I don't know. But anyway, we shot way past that. And I feel like that's a pretty good-sized city considering how little land I've actually developed overall compared to the full size of the map. I mean, half the map is made up of water and like a third of it is made up of undevelopable mountains. Is that a word? Undevelopable? Anyway, there are additional condos in this district that I'm going to be taking inspiration from, and they're basically a few different varieties of low-density condos, or at least low-rise condos. One detailing technique that I was experimenting with here was instead of trying to let the map's grass texture show through and try to work around that, which is kind of annoying because you get this ruining texture at the edge of it, and my map theme doesn't really work with that in a way that is easy to use. I found that it's easier just to detail as if that grass isn't there. So basically that just involves covering up the map theme's texture, whether that is painting over the whole thing with pavement in Surface Painter, or in this case, putting down some tile decals and grass planter props, morphing them around a little bit with PO to get the shapes I want. And I think that just gives you a little bit more freedom, and it doesn't tie you to these kind of arbitrary areas of texture that you get from just the layout of the roads and how they interact with the map theme. It just gives you a little bit more control over it. It's also a little bit more effort to make it look nice because you have to make sure you get all these clean lines with grass planters and decals and stuff. But like I mentioned before, I really wanted to go into detail in these builds. And this is really just my first attempt at this kind of detailing. So hopefully it'll make more sense what I'm talking about as we get to the next set of condos and some of the stuff that we're going to do next episode as well. So for the next set of condos, hopefully it'll demonstrate a little bit better what I was talking about. Basically, I just completely ignored the textures that I had on the surface of the map and built this little cluster of condos. So I used 3 of these Arcadian row houses, pushed them right up against each other so they look like a single building. Also, just a side note, these buildings are probably the closest I've been able to find to some of the condos in San Juan, so I love using these, and this is not the last time we're going to use them for sure. Anyway, I decorate their little backyards and then paste them into various rows. And I paint over the whole thing with Surface Painter, just covering the whole area with pavement, and then I can more easily figure out where I want these landscaped areas of grass, and then I'm just using my favorite grass step asset and adjusting it with PO to fit all these spaces and just cover up all this concrete that I don't want. Basically, just leaving enough for the sidewalk and the walkways in between the buildings as well. It also makes it a lot easier if you want to come back in and add decals to the walkways, like to differentiate these walkways from the sidewalk. Even though I don't actually do that here, I just leave the normal pavement texture. I think it looks good enough in this case. Now we have one last complex of condos here, and I'm just doing kind of a quick version of what we've done for everything else, painting over the whole thing with pavement in Surface Painter, and making these little landscaped grass areas around each condo. I've noticed that most condos in this situation will have a small perimeter of grass right around the base of the building. And then I'm going to copy and paste these around until they more or less efficiently use up this space. Finally, I'm going to come back through and surround this condo complex with these beautiful, relatively new park fences. This set is a collection of park props, including walls, gates, gazebo, fountain, that kind of thing, by name and valid. And they are just these green walls with the white columns on top are just so good. I've been waiting for an asset like this for so long, so it's really nice to finally get to use something like this, and we're going to use it all over for the remainder of the series. Finally, to finish off this build, we need a few things to fill in the area around the freeway right next to the entrance to the airport. So I'm going to be taking inspiration from this part of Carolina. In particular, this tall and wide apartment building that has a small shopping center down at the bottom. To get approximately the right shape and size, I'm going to stretch this asset out, copy and paste it so we get two of them back to back, and flip the second copy in PO so that we get a mirror image of it and it just looks more natural and they connect a little bit more realistically. I'm not going to worry too much about making a custom parking lot. I'm just going to use the largest size of the parking lot roads and plop that down underneath the building, and then use these Red Rock Plaza assets for this base of the shopping center. After that, it's really just about adding a few details. So we have these concrete sidewalks, which are matched with the sidewalks attached to the Red Rock Plaza buildings. I'm going to arrange those just along the edge of the building to kind of make a cohesive base for it, and then fill up all the remaining space with a custom parking lot. And of course, as usual, because all of this is done with PO, I need to add some residential and commercial blocks to simulate the businesses and houses that should be here. Now we have these giant electricity towers or pylons or whatever they're called, and I've had this issue for a while of how to route these all the way from the power plant down to the airport. Originally in the airport build, I had them running to a substation right next to the cargo area, but I couldn't really make it curve around this building properly, so I just add an additional substation here, and the line terminates there instead. Across the freeway, I wanted one more high-rise, so I'm using this Brazilian bank asset by name Invalid, which I just think looks really cool, and it had just come out, I think, when I was working on this build. For the rest of this district, we're going to not put down any more high-rises, but go with some low-density commercial and residential. Starting with this strip down the middle, I'm going to cap it off with a gas station on this end, because we just can never have enough gas stations, especially in this sort of context, right next to the freeway, right next to the airport. We're going to want one of these detailed up really quickly so they have a little like maintenance building in the back, so you could go there and get your car work done, I guess. And then for the rest of this central commercial strip, I'm going to be taking inspiration from this avenue that I stumbled across in San Juan. Now, it has these long rows of relatively small commercial buildings that are all in a variety of different styles. And for the majority of the stretch, it has on-street angled parking, which I think is kind of cool, and it's not something I've done too much of in this series. So I'm going to be taking that idea, and instead of having these run along the outside of a single avenue, I'm going to put them in the center between two one-way avenues, just because that's the road layout I had available here. So I'm going to use 4-lane one-way roads on either side, ban cars on the interior lanes, and then put down these parking lot road parking spaces, angled, of course, so we can get that angled look. And then I'm going to cover up the interior 2 lanes as well with some ploppable asphalt so that we don't get the road lines underneath the parking, which would look a little bit strange. Then I'm going to find all the 2 deep buildings that I have that look like they would fit in this sort of area and put them down in an arrangement that looks nice. Going along with what I was talking about before when we were making the supermarket, I want to give all of these buildings proper access. So I'm just running an alley down the center of this block and detailing it up, making sure every building has a door on the back, or at least most of the buildings do. Having quite a few cars parked here. I suppose this would probably be like employee parking. And then just a few miscellaneous kind of commercial style details. Dumpsters, pallets of random crap, and cars that are parked at an angle up on the curb. I thought the road network here was looking just a little bit more plain than I wanted it to. So I'm going to use IMT and PO and a couple other things to try to just make it a little more irregular, make it look a little bit more interesting than it is just with the... Because when you have just like the vanilla networks sitting there as they are, it just looks like city skylines. So I wanted to just spruce it up a little bit. So I'm going to use IMT to add curbs covering up the area that's used for parking, or at least the end caps of that, and then add some pavement bridges there with PO, just because you can't actually put decals on top of IMT fillers, and then add some tactile paving decals at the corners of the intersections. And I think just those few details are really going to make this place stand out, just that little extra bit without being too over the top. I'm going to add a few more details, a little bit of a mural along here. Instead of trying to put together my own with props, I'm just going to take this graffitied warehouse and add that in there onto the wall with PO. Add some planters with these nice little palms, and do this over and over again a few more times. At the end here, where we have this unusual intersection, I decided just to do a triangular building instead of trying to make this into a park or something like that. Add a little parking lot, maybe implying that this business here at the end is separate from this commercial development along the center strip of the avenue. And then behind this development, I'm going to add another row of commercial buildings. A little bit more freedom this time, so I was using 3 deep buildings. And then here there's a small neighborhood. Now over in this strip, I wasn't sure what to do at first, but I did eventually stumble across this condo development in San Juan on this little strip of land in between the freeway and a low-density neighborhood. I was very stupid and didn't record this, but I did get a quick before and after. Using these Art Deco condos, coloring them this kind of weird orange color, and just giving them a little bit of landscaping and some parking lots. Finally, we have this little area here. Wasn't really sure what else to do, but I decided to transition from the commercial area to the residential area with just this low density office, which is a real Puerto Rican office, which is always cool to use in this city. And guess what? It's getting a big parking lot. So that's it for the second to last episode of Todos Santos. I'm going to try to take it up a notch next episode. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode of Todos Santos, and I can't wait to see you next time on the finale.